So in this video we're going to be talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh himself was an actual king of Uruk, one of the city-states of Sumer. He is appearing on the Sumerian kings list and seems to have reigned sometime in the early 3rd millennium, somewhere around 2800, 2700 BCE, so 5,000 years ago. But he is known almost exclusively through the Epic of Gilgamesh that was told about him, and so functions in many ways as sort of a prototype and symbol of kingship for the Sumerians and for the peoples that lived afterwards in Mesopotamia. Indeed, there is a great deal about the Epic of Gilgamesh that speaks so directly to the human condition, to what it means to be a part of society, the relationship between the individual and the community, and the relationship between the individual and the divine as refracted in this one kind of individual, a king with responsibilities in both directions, that it has been preserved for thousands of years when many other works of literature and human expression have been lost. The Epic of Gilgamesh we know primarily through versions that were preserved by later peoples in Mesopotamia. It was written by the Sumerians, but was recorded and preserved by the peoples of Akkad, and then later by the peoples of Babylon and Ashur, the Assyrians, all of whom were Semitic immigrants to Mesopotamia who came to that part of the world much later than the Sumerians, and who had a fundamentally different kind of language, different culture, different ideas about society, and a different heritage. And nevertheless, they were able to see something of value in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the main transformations that they undertook were to rename some of the gods from the Sumerian names to their Mesopotamian, Babylonian equivalents. Most notably, the Sumerian goddess Inanna is referred to in the version that we have as Ishtar, the name by which that goddess of fertility and war was known to the people of Akkad and Babylon. The Epic of Gilgamesh is preserved for us in a way that is not exactly what you would call intact. There are 11 tablets of the original or standard version, but the oldest and most authentic versions of these tablets have come down to us, obviously heavily damaged by time. And so it requires a great deal of interpretation to tell the story of Gilgamesh at all. And the version of the tale that has come down to us directly through the damaged tablets of the standard version has to be compared to other iterations of the tale that have been handed down through later generations. This is why, as you look through the book, you'll see that there are large sections of the material that are in brackets, are marked with ellipses, where no interpretation could be made, where the later versions of the story are substituted for passages that did not survive, and so forth. And so, what you're seeing is the most authentic edition that we can put together. This is actually what brings us closest to the voices of the original authors in Sumer from thousands of years ago. It requires some work on the part of the editors. It requires some work on our part. But this takes us closest to hearing the story as it was originally understood, and allows us in turn to get some feeling for both the storytellers and the audience, what they were telling and what they were expecting. So the characters in the Epic of Gilgamesh that you'll want to pay attention to, and the questions that you want to ask about each of these. Obviously, Gilgamesh is the central character, is the protagonist. He is the driving force behind the plot. He undertakes a great quest, and the nature of that quest starts to shift over the course of the story. This is an action-adventure story in many ways, but it is there is a great deal that has additional levels. This is a story about a hero, but a hero that is motivated by concerns that speak to the human experience, that speaks to the responsibilities and problems of what it means to be human in an ancient civilization. A great deal of which has not fundamentally changed in the millennia since. So there are basically three different ways in which you want to try to look at Gilgamesh and understand him. First of all, and this is highlighted from the very beginning of the story, Gilgamesh, his relationship to the society of which he is a ruler, his relationship to the city of Uruk. What we find in Tablet 1 is that relationship is undergoing a crisis, because Gilgamesh is not performing the duties required of a king. He does not understand the responsibilities of being a ruler. And this is something that it carries through as an undertone in his later adventures, and comes to underline the very last scene of the epic. The nature of society is a city is not a thing of buildings, and this is something we'll talk about elsewhere. What the nature of a city is not the structures of it, is not the streets and the bricks and the mortar. A city consists of relationships, and the relationships that people have in a society. We'll see this again when we come to the Greeks. This is the essence of what Homer talks about, and elsewhere in ancient writings and cultures. And so the problem here is underlined in Tablet 1. Gilgamesh is violating his relationship with the women of Uruk, and is betraying the men as well, in different ways, both of which speak to the bonds that make up society, the bonds between men and women, the bonds between men and men. And so this carries over, this overlaps with the second way in which he wants to look at Gilgamesh, his relationship with the gods. His responsibilities to the people include his function as intermediary between the human, the mortal, and the divine, the immortal. In the ancient world in general, there are two different kinds of kings, broadly speaking, or two different kinds of expectations that peoples have of their rulers. So on the one hand, there's the general idea of the priest king. That is, that the king stands as a representative of the human community, and his role is to intermediate between the mortal and the divine, between humans and gods. This is called the priest king. The function of a priest is to intermediate between the human and the divine. And so this is particularly found in places where people are struggling to survive, where the environment is indifferent or hostile, and the characterization of the divine by people who live in such environments is to see the gods as being on the one as being fundamentally capricious, as being fickle, as being inclined to cherish, on one day and to destroy on another, and to ignore on a third. That the gods are at least potentially hostile, and so the role of the priest king as an intermediary standing between humans and the gods is as much to be a champion and defender of humans as anything else. The other role of the king that we see in the ancient world is the king as a representative, as an agent of the gods. And so therefore being essentially divine himself. And this is referred to as the God King. We see this in Egypt in particular, where the king is doing the will of the gods and is seen as a manifestation of the gods. This makes the king much more powerful in society, and also fundamentally separated from the human condition in many ways. And the dynamics of that we'll see later on when we talk about Egypt and other places where the God King is prevalent. The point here, the reason I bring this up, is that in Sumer, where the conditions are hostile, where the gods can not be counted on to persist in protecting humans, can be expected to occasionally turn upon and wreak havoc upon the mortal world. The king's role is to protect humans against chaos, against the wild, against the natural world and the divine that is reflected in the natural world. And so Gilgamesh's responsibilities to his community and the interactions that he has with the gods should be seen in this light. Finally, the way that the action is driven forward is that Gilgamesh embarks upon a heroic quest. But the nature of this quest is one that shifts towards the concerns of every human being. In other words, Gilgamesh starts out seeking a kind of glory, but with the pivotal death of Enkidu, his companion, he ends up seeking to overcome the peril of death itself. And the reasons that he embarks on this quest, the way in which the death is seen as the ultimate impotence, that in a hostile natural environment one must seek to accomplish and to ensure that one's accomplishments will survive. Death is the greatest handicap that humans possess, and so to a great extent the story is about this. This is the peg for this is the idea of the deluge. The culture of Sumer revolves around a transforming moment in which the gods destroyed the world by a great flood, and the world then had to be rebuilt through the great labor and perseverance by the mortals who came afterwards. And the one survivor of this flood is a man named Utnapishtim. Gilgamesh's encounters with Utnapishtim are very much a part of this exploration of what it means to be mortal. In this story, Gilgamesh is given a companion, and so one of the things you want to ask yourself is why, what function does Enkidu serve, and in particular, why is it that Enkidu is presented as coming from the wild, and why is it that that Enkidu is transformed into a civilized man through the act of intercourse with a woman. And finally, the meaning of Enkidu's death and the nature of his relationship with Gilgamesh. The dynamic here is the dynamic between men that is one of the key pillars of ancient society. And in Enkidu's death, you see, Gilgamesh being profoundly affected. The mortality of humans is brought home to him as a result of the death of Enkidu. And this changes Gilgamesh's outlook and direction. The fact that Enkidu is transformed by an encounter with a woman is the other side of this. The male-female bond, which is the other key pillar to public society in the ancient world. And so the character of Shamat, even though she appears in a relatively small number of scenes, is absolutely vital. How is it that Shamat performs this transformation with Enkidu? What is the significance of the fact that she is a prostitute? Why is this relevant? And remember that our condemnation of prostitution is very much a modern thing. So it's important not to be anachronistic in talking about the prostitute in ancient society. We'll talk more about that in class. And then there's a key phrase in which this is imposed upon Shamat. She is directed to do the work of woman. What is meant by that phrase in the context of this story? Another major player in the Epic of Gilgamesh is the goddess Ishtar, originally in Sumerian the goddess Inanna, who, as I mentioned, is the goddess of fertility and war, and so very much a formidable figure. Ishtar is characterized in a way that might seem to be representative of women, but in fact, the characterization has everything to do with the capriciousness of the gods and the fact that whereas human beings are impose order on civilization and bind themselves with morality. What characterizes the gods is that they are unbound. They are not bound by death, and they are not bound by laws or morals. And we see this in Gilgamesh's description of how Ishtar treats her past lovers, as well as how Ishtar behaves when Gilgamesh spurns her. And so the denial of Ishtar by Gilgamesh and Gilgamesh's reactions are another key part of the story. And then finally, Utnapishti, the survivor of the flood. This is a character that is separated from humanity by the fact that he survived this one great moment of death. And so his survival of death is something that sets him apart from humanity. In a sense, he loses his identity. He loses his membership in society in having taken this, and so you want to look at how Utnapishti is shown compared to Gilgamesh, and the tests that are given to Gilgamesh as a means of potentially making that same transition, and the results of them. There are certain other characters that are also, minor, but have an interesting impact and are worth looking at. Look at Ninsun and the dreams and the premonitions that she has with regard to her son, with regards to potentially shining a path for Gilgamesh. Humbaba, the fourth guardian. This is what kind of role is he performing? This is not merely a monster. This is an element of the divine with a specific role to perform. And then the actions of two other gods that have a role in the story, Shamash and Enlil, are both worth looking at. Ultimately, we'll talk more about the Epic of Gilgamesh, but as you are reading through it, ask yourself questions. Ask yourself why it is that the story is being shown in this way and how it reflects upon the major themes involving Gilgamesh, involving society, and involving the mortal relationship with the gods. And that's that.